Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Marla Gordon with Kendal at Home, and today is day 2 of our Fall Prevention Week. When we talk about falls, we don't often consider falls from the perspective of a first responder. So this morning, we're happy to have with us Assistant Fire Chief Will Mueller from the Colerain Fire Department, who will talk about falls from his perspective and give a little more insight from what they see as they're making calls out to individuals who have had falls and some suggestions on how to prevent those falls. Welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor. And I can go ahead and jump right in if you'd like.
Absolutely. I'm going to be right here if you need anything.
Okay, sounds good. Well, good morning again, everyone. It's morning for most everybody, I believe, here. And again, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today about the fire service perspective on falls. We know falls are a problem, and but to what degree and to why and to what do we do about it is another narrative. And so I want to share that a little bit with everybody in terms of our fire department perspective. So as introduced, my name is Will Mueller. And what are my responsibilities as an assistant fire chief? Well, outside of running the fire department, I also oversee our training services division, our emergency medical services division, and our community risk reduction division. And when we talk about community risk reduction, it's talking about programs that are geared toward driving down the risk potential for someone to be injured in any fashion, or to become ill. So that means spreading public outreach programs, health awareness programs, and programs like fall prevention programs. So that's really a big part of what I do, a big passion for what I do in terms of public outreach. So a couple of things we're going to discuss here during my time with you over the next 45 minutes to an hour are these things right here. So we're going to discuss the fire service perspective on our nation's fall problem, bring to you, I guess, a different lens, if you will. We're going to discuss why this is a fire service problem. So this is a social issue, right, as it pertains to the older adult population. However, this is also a fire service problem. So I'm going to talk about why and what our perspective lies and how our perspective lies there. Discuss ways in which to better prevent falls. This is, prevention is key. Awareness is key. And I'm going to say that a couple times throughout this presentation, probably, just because it's that important. And the fact that you are here watching this presentation means that you buy into that. And so that's huge. That's important. We're also going to discuss ways that we can reduce injury potential should you happen to fall. So you find yourself in a situation where you've fallen, what things can you have in place in and around the home that can increase response times from pre-hospital care professionals, EMTs, paramedics, the fire department, and then how can we better access you to render quicker treatment, right? And that all falls in under that reducing that injury potential column. All right, so that's what we're going to talk about. And if there's any questions, I'm not sure how accessible the chat feature is to everybody. However, if there's any questions, I'll just go ahead and jump in with the mechanism that you're used to. And I'll allow kind of Marla to handle that. As mentioned, the first thing I want to talk about here is the fire service perspective. So the big thing is if you ask any pre-hospital care professional, an EMT, paramedic, firefighter, if you ask them the question, so how do you feel about older adult falls? The number one response is going to be, well, there's a lot of them. Well, that's a no-brainer. That's the initial perspective, right? There are a lot of them. Well, how many? And we all know this is a problem, so I'm not going to take a real deep dive into some of the numbers, but these are worth, I think, just having fresh in our minds as we go about the rest of the conversation here. So that's why I do bring them up. And so not necessarily meant to instill fear or angst, but more so to put in perspective what we see from a fire department perspective. So 36 million falls occur each year, right? And so that's nationally, resulting in 32,000 deaths, and that's a lot. All right, as we know, 1 in 4 Americans older than 65 are going to fall, and 25% of them are going to 25% of those falls are going to result in some sort of injury. And those injuries can be anything from a broken ankle, a fractured hip, to something even more debilitating than that, head injuries, for example. The costs, and so this is the real big thing outside of the quality of life that's impacted as a result of the fall. You know, we're staring down a very dim tunnel as it pertains to medical costs, right? We already know Medicare is in trouble, and Medicare is due to start to run out of funding in 2026 and not have enough money to support all of its members that will be in need by that time. So looking at fall prevention measures now is an upstream method of trying to reduce this number by 2030, which is now anticipated to reach $101 billion. So we're really staring down a dim road. And so everything that we can do now in terms of education, awareness, prevention, is going to help offset some of those costs and help preserve Medicare funding down the line, right? So in Ohio alone, and I'm going to kind of narrow the scope a little bit. We talked about national, now we're going to talk about the state of Ohio. From the year 2000 to 2020, so the last 2 decades, there's been a 165% increase in the fall death rate. Obviously, the number of falls have increased as our population continues to age, but the death rate from them has also increased. So while there's an increased number of falls, they've not become less deadly, right? And as we probably already know, falls remain the leading cause of injury-related emergency room visits, right? Especially for those individuals age 65 and older. So that's the state perspective. Now I'm going to even narrow it down just a little bit further to a pinpoint here in Colerain Township, which is a suburb located just northwest of the city of Cincinnati in the state of Ohio. So Colerain Township is the largest township in the state of Ohio. It's the 13th largest community overall. That includes Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, and those larger cities. So we're a very large township covering about 43 square miles with 60,000 residents. And so in 2020, what the fall epidemic looked like in Colerain Township, we responded to 1,242 falls in that 1 year. That represents about 14% of our overall run volume. We respond to over 10,000 emergency calls a year, and 1,200 of them are falls. And more importantly, we found that 625 of those were mechanical or preventable in nature. They fell as a result of tripping over something, a loose grab bar, broken steps, things like that. So they were preventable in nature. All right. And 220 of them were repeat fall victims. So this tells us another thing, that we don't just have a fall problem, but we have a repeat fall problem. So, and that's big to understand too. Our fall responses, to put this in perspective, in 2011 were 668. So a 60% increase in the fall responses since 2011. So this is a real problem for Colerain Township. So again, we're looking at what's the fire service perspective on this, viewing the lens of the fall epidemic through the lens of a firefighter, paramedic, or EMT. All right, what are the cause of these things? So what do we see here primarily in terms of a cause, right? So I'm a very root cause person, because in order to address prevention, where it's going to be most effective, we have to understand root cause. And so over the course of the last several years, since 2016, I've been keeping track of the largest numbers, I guess, categories of falls and what their root cause was. And so what we see here are a list of them. So general weakness, right? That could be brought on through a variety of things as we age. The aging process brings on a number of these, and not that it has to, but it does in many individuals. Loss of balance and dizziness. A lot of times this is attributed to medications and timing of medications. Beta blockers, things that are designed to keep your heart rate and your blood pressure low, sometimes can be a detriment when you get up in the middle of the night and have the urge to go to the bathroom. Just for an example, musculoskeletal issues, right? Natural degradation of joints, knee pain, hip pain, back pain, all these things that throw us off our normal gait, or a normal gait um, that cause falls. Poor lighting is another one. And so one of the things we've done here in Colerain is we hand out free night lights. When we do, I'm going to get into the home assessments here in just a little bit, but when we do home assessments and fall risk assessments inside individuals' homes, lighting is one of the things that we look for, especially as people get up in the middle of the night. Turning on a bright light is not always the best thing to do, because individuals can't necessarily see when the light's so bright. However, smaller lights along the path to the bathroom can be very beneficial. Throw rugs are huge. Lots of trips and falls as a result of throw rugs, or throw rugs being placed improperly, or not being secured, or just by age curling up. Mental decline is a big one too. And so dementia comes into play too. People, honestly, they forget how to mitigate steps. They forget how to mitigate their homes. So that's a big one. Or they forget where they're going. They become anxious, to become in a rush, right? Kitchen and furniture arrangement. This is another big one. And, I've been in the homes of many older adults, and trying to get Mrs. Smith, who's 75 or 80 years old, who has kept her favorite pot down on the lowest cabinet on level with the floor, is very unwilling to move it, because I've been told many times before, honey, that pot's been in that place for 50 years and it's not moving. It's not moving now. So that is a hard one. That's a real hard one from a cultural perspective. And I know I'm going to be the same way when I reach that age. I like things in a certain place, and it's not going to move, and I'll risk falling over moving that pot oftentimes. Lack of assist devices around the home. And a lot of individuals don't know how to get connected to the proper resources for grab bars, for handrails. They just don't think about these things, along like putting them along the hallways in their homes, where they tend to lose balance. And a lot of times when we do home assessments, we have people go through about their normal day. Show us how you get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. Show us how you use some of your favorite things in your kitchen. Show us how you move around your home. And a lot of times what we track is when they're walking down the hallway, we watch to see where they start to grab onto things for assistance, where they start to grab a wall, because this is about the point where they start to lose their balance. Their muscles get tired from the walk. And so that's a place that we mark, hey, this might be a good place just to have a hand railing, so that you're not reaching out for a wall, you've got something more secure. So we see a lot of lack of assist devices, and particularly in the bathroom. A lot of individuals, even if they know how to get connected to those resources, there's a little bit of a stigma associated with those, because people don't like the look. Well, grab bars have come a long way in our time, and they have really nice looking residential hand bars now that don't even look like handrails or grab bars. People think institutional, like what they see in a hospital or in a hotel. So they've come a long way. Walkway step degradation. We see this a lot of individuals who don't have the necessary monetary resources to be able to fix walkways, repair walkways that are crumbled or broken, and they take a risk every single day as they mitigate those steps. Rug patterns, and I'm going to show you a couple of those things here in a little bit too. Rug patterns are a big cause for a lot of our falls. Anti-slip material in bathrooms and tubs especially. Floors get wet. Bathroom mats that are the memory foam material are very absorbent, and they tend to absorb a lot of water around them. So we encourage a lot of use of those instead of having just normal rugs that can slip on water. And the biggest thing here, inability to use assist devices around their spaces. So we have walkers that individuals use, but they can't use them everywhere because furniture is so tight. So they end up abandoning their assist device or their walker and just going at it alone as they mitigate around sofas to sit down, or chairs to watch TV, for example. So we try to get individuals to create some space in their home so that they've got proper use for their assist devices wherever it is they're going to go. So those are a lot. But these are the ones that we commonly run into. And not sure if I was going through that list, maybe you checked a couple off on your own. I said I was going to show some floor patterns that really cause us problems sometimes out in our businesses, and in some of our facilities around the township, that are of assembly nature, where people get together, shopping malls, movie theaters, places like that. People like to decorate their steps, and a lot of times patterns are very confusing. If you look on the left side of the screen there, and hopefully you have a good visual of these, you can see that while that looks really neat, can cause can wreak havoc on individuals who are struggling to mitigate steps, or who are already struggling with eye issues, cataracts. And what happens is those patterns tend to just blend everything together, and you can't tell the difference between the rise or the rate of the steps. So those cause problems for us. Floors like you see in the middle, open restaurant designs and assembly areas, general purpose rooms and churches, things, they have these very decorative, very flashy floors, and they're very high gloss, which is an attraction, because it shows that it's shiny and clean. However, reflections off of these floors are a thing that really causes a lot of problems. Individuals have a hard time seeing. They see these patterns mixed with the reflection, and a lot of times it makes for very insecure footing. And the steps on the right are nothing but an absolute nightmare. So very abstract floor patterns like this, if you can see that, I can't even tell really where the step starts and where the step ends. And so these things are nightmares. And so what we try to do with people, when we have conversations with businesses and residents, we talk about floor patterns on their steps and carpet patterns, because this is outside of slip hazards on steps. Now we integrate patterns like this that create a great deal of confusion. All right, so what did we do here in Colerain? I'm just going to kind of give you a high-level view of the steps that we took here in Colerain to address some of these issues. Back in 2015, I knew that we had to do something different, because we were responding to falls and we were just leaving. And Mrs. Smith was left to not having or being connected to any resource at all. And many times medical providers, their primary care physicians, never knew about the fall, because Mrs. Smith would fall, we would show up, she wasn't really injured, so she didn't go to the hospital. And so she signed a release, and we returned to the fire station and left Mrs. Smith back home with the same fall risks that she was the day before we arrived. And this is a real problem for me. And I made the determination that we had to do things differently, that we had to start addressing falls right there when we were on the scene of the 911 call. But then more importantly, we had to come back to Mrs. Smith and have another conversation, a deeper conversation about why the fall occurred and what we can do to stop coming back for these repeat falls. If you remember, we had a lot of repeat falls, 220 out of the 600 and so that were actually deemed preventable. So a third of these individuals were repeat. So imagine if I left the home and said, hey, Mrs. Smith, sorry you fell, but we're going to leave now. The chances are we got a 33% chance that we're going to come back and see you again. So good luck. I had a real problem with that. So why did we intervene? So why now? Well, I often ask the question to other individuals, when's the best time to plant a tree? I don't know. Well, the best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago, right? So it's mature now and given us the benefit. But when's the second best time to plant a tree? And that's right now, right? So same thing with fall prevention measures. When's the best time to implement a fall prevention measure? Well, it was 30 years ago. When's the next best time? It's today. So that's the why now. Why the fire department? Well, the fire department, based on the information I've given you so far, I think it's pretty easy to determine that fire departments are big stakeholders in this, not from an injury perspective, but from a response perspective. So I have this saying here around the fire department that if the fire department has a responsibility to respond to it, then we have a responsibility to prevent it from happening in the first place. Now, that turns a lot of heads sometimes. We've done it from a fire department perspective for decades, right? Starting back in the 60s and 70s, we started to develop fire codes to keep people safe in the event of a building fire. We developed occupancy codes, right? Only so many people can be inside of a general assembly of building. You have to have special release mechanisms on doors in the event there's a fire so people can evacuate very quickly, right? We developed safety measures in the fire code so that there's electrical standards, there are mechanical standards, where storage standards, where things can't be held or can't be too close to combustibles. Open flames can't be too close to combustibles. We've established fire sprinkler requirements, right? If a fire were to happen, that it could get put out very quickly before it spread to the other through the rest of the building. So we've been doing it from the fire perspective for decades. Why are we not doing it from a medical perspective? And I began asking those questions, and began, started coming up with this response. So that's why the fire department, because we're big stakeholders and we have an obligation, since we respond to it, to keep it from happening in the first place. And so why this program? And so this program was developed to create what I consider to be a 360-degree approach to fall prevention measures, where we do prevention and education to prevent the fall from happening again. But then we also bring resources to the doorstep of the individual who needs them, instead of relying on someone else to go get them on their own. Okay, so how does this program work? So our fall prevention program, while it's somewhat preventative in nature in terms of providing education and awareness to keep it from happening again, it is somewhat reactive too, because it kicks off after a fall has already occurred. All right, that's how we get our client base. So we reach out to individuals who have fallen. And so what we do is we bring on-site treatment, transport, and education directly there with our 911 response call. And that's when we start having the discussion with somebody about the fall. How did you fall, Mrs. Smith? Well, I fell on this rug over here. Well, if this is something that Mrs. Smith will allow us to address, we'll address it right there at the 911 call, instead of waiting for the follow-up phone call with one of our community paramedics. So we'll address things right there on site. Right. Then we have a follow-up phone call where one of our community paramedics reaches out to the individual that fell, and we schedule with them, if they're open to it, a free home assessment and a future fall risk assessment. So we'll come inside the home and we'll do a complete assessment of the home. We'll assess for all the things that I mentioned before: rugs, throw rugs, furniture placement. We'll look for other hazards around the home, trip cords, like extension cords, electrical cords. And then we'll also do fire safety, right? So smoke detector, CO detector, access to the home. Is there a plan? And I want to talk about that here in just a little bit too. So we'll come out, we'll do that free assessment, right? Once we get to the home, there's 4 parts to this. We do blood pressure testing, orthostatic blood pressure testing, and that's a medical term. But to put it simply, I'm sure that we've all experienced standing up and feeling that head rush, right? Ooh, I got a head rush. Well, that's orthostatics, right? That's our blood shifting from our brain, all of a sudden responding to gravity, where it suddenly drops, and all of a sudden our as we age, our heart can't keep up with the demand. So it takes a few seconds for everything to kind of catch back up, and then once we get our bearings, we're okay. We do what's called a timed up and go test, where we time people to stand up from a sitting position, walk 10 feet, turn around, and sit back down. We do a questionnaire, and then we do that home assessment that I talked about before too. So we do all of those things, and so that's great, but did it have an impact? So the pilot program lasted 1 year, from July 1st of 15 to August of 2016. And we started at 6 o'clock in the morning, and wouldn't you know it, within 17 minutes, we got our first call. So it took 17 minutes to get our first fall. We had certain criteria for those individuals that we followed up with. And out of those, we had 134 people meet that criteria. We kept the scope of the project very, very small at first. 42 of the 134 people allowed us in their homes to do the assessment. 42 out of 134. That's not a lot. I was hoping for a lot more, but individuals weren't ready. They're not used to having the fire department call and say, hey, can we come back into your home? There's a lot of fear. There's fear that we were going to come into the home and want to take somebody from their home or say, you should live by yourself anymore. And that's not the goal of the program at all. Quite contrary, actually. Our goal is to keep people inside their homes, living safely with the highest quality of life possible for as long as we can, because that's the lowest healthcare cost setting, and that's what's best for everyone involved. But we just want people to do that safely, right? So 42 individuals met the criteria, or allowed us to, or 134 met the criteria, 42 allowed us to come back. But out of those 42 people over the course of the year, that pilot program, there was 84 repeat falls. So I already told you there, can you get a number? 42 people let us inside their home. And there's a couple of pictures from the news story. The news came out and did a story on our fall prevention program. And so some of these are taken from the news clip there. As you see, one of our paramedics getting ready to enter the home for a follow-up visit. And you'll see a few of those pictures throughout. So the tug test I talked about, I'm not going to get into the details here. It just really painted a picture that we really have an aging demographic with a huge fall risk potential. So essentially 74% of our individuals that we met with failed the assessment. And then there were 7% of them that couldn't even complete getting up, walking 10 feet. And of those, there were 3 individuals, and of those 3 individuals, all of them were living alone, which is really scary. Future fall risk assessment, based on the score, we ask a series of questions, and they're assessed points based on the risk. The higher the number, the worse that it is. 100% scored greater than 4 points, indicating that they were at a significant increased risk for a fall. So 100% of those individuals we met with were at a great risk for a future fall, which painted a real significant picture to me, right? However, after we got people connected to fall resources, we partnered with people working cooperatively to install assist devices that were minimal charge or free of charge based on financial situations and qualifications, based on conducting measures right there inside the home at the time of the 911 call. We were able to reduce those repeat falls by 22%. So those clients that were in our program fell 22% less. And what does that mean from a run perspective? It meant that we saved approximately 140 911 calls. So, and that, from the cost perspective, what did that save in the healthcare system? Well, our average, we bill for emergency medical services. We bill insurance. We don't bill individuals. We only bill insurance. And I have to bring this up because I think it paints a picture. And most 911 agencies do bill. A lot of times they don't bill residents. They only bill the insurance like we do here. So our residents never pay an out-of-pocket expense for an ambulance transport. Whatever's not covered by the insurance, we write off. But the average cost recoup that we get from a reimbursement perspective is about $270 per call. And that's how I came up with this figure. So that $270 saved by insurance per call times 140 meant that there was approximately $38,500 saved to the medical system just through these simple steps that we took within a 1-year time. Multiply that over years, multiply that over jurisdictions, and what do we have in terms of health saving costs, right? Now, that's decreased reimbursement for the fire department, but that's okay, because what we're talking about here is an increased quality of life to our residents. I don't mind losing $38,000 in EMS billing revenue. What I care about is that Mrs. Smith is safe in her home. And that's 140 times that we were available to respond to something significant like a heart attack or trouble breathing or a stroke, right? Those things that are more serious in nature, because we prevented something that was preventable, right? So 38,500, again, imagine the savings across the nation, across jurisdictions. This is just Colerain Township. This is a pinpoint, right? We talked about national statistics, state statistics, Colerain Township, just a pinpoint on the map, 38,500 in 1 year. So again, our program, I thought, was a 360-degree approach, from the assessment to home modifications to referring to the right agencies, to the right resources, to the right social resources, to helping with coordination and balance enhancement. We offered free Tai Chi courses, free stepping on courses, free fall prevention 101 courses, and then reassessment, right? So we went back 3 times within that 1-year period to trend patient condition, and that's how we monitored our repeat falls. So that was a little bit more of an in-depth view that I thought I was going to give. But those are things I think are all necessary to understand how fire departments are getting involved, or at least how they can get involved by preventing these measures. And so what was the cost of the program? For the fire department, it was free because we partnered with Ohio Department of Health and the Ohio Older Adult Falls Prevention Coalition, and we received grant funding for the program. So the program was free to the residents of Colerain Township, and we saved $38,000 to the healthcare system. How do we prevent falls from happening? I think it's safe to say, and I say this all the time, falls are not a normal part of the aging process. And I think that's the first part to addressing stigma in our communities. I think a lot of people say, well, you know, Mrs. Smith is 75, she's going to fall from time to time. Well, what if we looked at it differently? What if we looked at it and said, you know what, falls are not a normal part of aging. They're preventable. The majority of them are, right? And so what if we took measures ahead of time? What if we got awareness and education out in the community? So how do we do this from a fire department perspective? How do we reach all of you that are out there watching? How do we reach all of you to help connect you with resources that can prevent a fall from happening in the first place? Because remember, we're staring down that dim road, right? We saw that anticipated cost by 2030, which is, by the way, only 8 years away, soon to be 7 years away, right? It's knocking on our doorstep, and we're looking at $101 billion across the nation in healthcare costs. We're staring down a dim window, or a dim pathway when it comes to Medicare funding. So how can we offset that, right? So how do we prevent falls? Well, the first thing is awareness and education. And what we found is just talking about things, just sitting here and having this conversation and hearing things, and keeping fall potential and fall risk in the forefront of our minds as we go about our daily lives can really prevent a lot of falls from happening in the first place. Getting connected to education resources like what you're doing today, I think, is amazing. I think what Kendal at Home is doing is absolutely amazing. I love the work that they do. Stepping on classes, free Tai Chi classes. There's all kinds of opportunities now through community centers, senior centers, and, dare I say, your fire department to help get connected to education resources. This is a big one. And those falls that we see, the number of falls, we know that they're grossly underreported. Those are the falls that we know about. The falls that we respond to here in Colerain Township, 1,242 in 2020. Those are the ones we were called to. Those are the ones we know about. But what about the ones where Mrs. Smith fell and she wasn't injured, thankfully, but she didn't call 911? How many times does that happen? I think a lot more than we know. And perhaps someone here has fallen and not report. I've fallen, right? I've tripped down my steps because I was doing something stupid. I never called 911. It's not reported. So a lot of our calls go unreported, and they especially go unreported to primary care physicians. Individuals are afraid to talk to their doctors about falls because they don't want to hear that phrase. Well, have you thought about selling your home and moving into somewhere like an assisted living type place? That's the last thing people want to hear as we strive to maintain our independence. And so, out of fear of that conversation coming up, they're not going to talk with their doctors. They're not going to talk with their children because they're afraid their children are going to say, Mom, Dad, it's time for us to sell the home and time for you to move somewhere else, right? No one wants to hear that. No one wants to have a conversation. So, but it's important to discuss these things with primary care physicians. They can look at medications. They can start looking at, hopefully they do, they can start looking at root cause for the fall. Like, why are you falling to begin with? Again, if we're approaching this through the posture of falls are not a normal part of aging, then we should be able to have these conversations, and we should be able to address root cause, right? So that nobody leaves their doctor's office without having a conversation. Next thing is changing the narrative, changing our culture, changing the stigma about falls, and from an older adult perspective, and this is a tough one, but being open to changes around the home, right? Being open-minded to say, you know what, I've kept this pot down here for the last 50 years, but I realize now that maybe I should move it here, especially since I use it 3 times a day. Because every time I bend over, I'm increasing my potential for a fall, right? I keep all these things downstairs in the basement, but I'll mitigate those steps each and every single time to use it because that's where I've kept it. Furniture arrangements. I know in dealing with my mother who passed away in 2016, I had a real hard time convincing her to move some furniture around. But she needed to in order to get where she needed to with her walker. Stretch and balance. Tai Chi is one of these things here too. Stretch and balance, stretch and balance. Can't be overstated enough. And I know that you've probably heard these things. Slow down. Don't be in a hurry. You know, a lot of times especially, you know, we get that call to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and we don't feel like we have any other option but to be in a hurry. But there's a lot of other measures that we can take, you know, and put in place if we need to be in a hurry. Grab bars, the lighting, proper lighting. Reach out for fall risk assessments. Have someone conduct a fall risk assessment inside your home, and be open to the changes there. Contact your local fire department. Ask them, do you do fall assessments? You know, I've heard fire departments are doing this. I don't have a list of fire departments that do the things that we do, but that's something that you can do to help prevent the fall in the first place, right? And so this is not an all-inclusive list by any stretch of the imagination, but these are the things that address most of the things that are on that list that I had a couple slides back, where I talked about the root cause of falls. So what's causing our falls here in Colerain Township? So that's why I bring these up, because these address a lot of those things. And again, not an all-inclusive list by any stretch. So a fall may occur, right? We can do all the right things and something may accidentally happen. What can we do to help reduce then the injury, prevent the potential, right? Or limit the injury? You know, instead of Mrs. Smith falling, hitting her head, knocking herself unconscious, not being able to call 911, and she lays there and that head injury becomes worse and worse. What if there were measures that were put in place that would help notify 911 even when Mrs. Smith couldn't do that? So we'll talk about some of these things here. The first thing from a fire department perspective, one of the things that concerns me most is just being able to get inside the home. Right. A lot of times we live in a society of fear, right? We live in the state of fear a lot where we worry about home intrusion, or maybe things aren't as safe as they used to be because what we see on the news. And so we keep our homes securely locked at all times. Not a bad thing. However, it can be a barrier for pre-hospital care, fire and EMS showing up at the house, being able to get inside your home. All right, so there's a couple of things that we recommend. And there's this company called Knox, Knox, like Fort Knox, right? And that's exactly what they do, is they provide safe, secure key access for residential homes. These Knox boxes, these residential Knox boxes, come in a variety of colors, sizes. They hold up to 2 keys. They can either mount to the side of the home or they can mount over top of the door. Again, they come in 3 colors. So it's more residential friendly. It doesn't look institutional. And they are weather resistant should they need to be installed out in the radiation, the sun, and the rain, right? So how does this program work? Essentially, these Knox boxes have a secure access where fire department is the only agency to have a key to get inside of that box. So if you put this box on your home, the fire department is the only one that is able to gain access to this particular box. And that key is safely secured in all of our apparatus. That key cannot be released out of a box inside of our fire engines and our ambulances unless we put in a special code. And that code is tracked. So we know exactly who accessed the key and when, how long the key was out for. So it is very safe. It is very secure. The cost of these residential boxes, like what you see there in the picture, are $191. In some areas may vary. So if you go to knoxbox.com or you call this 800 number that I have on the screen here, you can get a price specific for your area. Unfortunately, my thought process is that these prices may vary based on geographical location. So when you first go to the website or when you first call, they're going to ask you your location where you live, because that sets up the pricing index. But for most jurisdictions, what I found is that these are about $190, and then there's a shipping cost to this. Your local fire department agency will install these for you. So you can say, well, so if I got the box, that's great. What am I going to do with it? I can't put it up. Your local fire department will be glad to install that for you. And if you have any problems with your local fire department, you call me and I will handle that for you. But anyway, so there you go. So those are home access is key. One of the things we hate to think of most is that once we get to the home, Mrs. Smith is laying there on the floor. She can't get up to unlock the door. Then we have to damage the door to get in. That's the last thing we want to do. So the $191 is an expense, of course, but it can save a much more costly expense by damage that we cause trying to get into the home. So because we have a universal key and it's called an axe. So we would hate to use that one. Here's a picture of what some of them look like. They have black as well, but these are some of the lighter colors that they come in. So again, they look a little more sleek in their design. They look a little less institutional. Second thing is, so home access is one of my biggest fears when it comes to trying to access Mrs. Smith as quickly as possible. But there's a relatively new, and this has been out now for about 6-7 years in most jurisdictions. And it's called the Smart 911 system. You may have heard the old Vial of Life program, or the File of Life. That's Vial, V as in Victor, IAL, or File, F as in Frank, ILE, Vial of Life. And those programs were originally designed so that when EMS responded to the home of a medical emergency, they could go to a refrigerator and pull out this Vial of Life, because everybody has a refrigerator, so it was a universal place. The fire department could respond, open up the refrigerator door, and look for this Vial of Life. They got a little sticker they could put on their door indicating that this existed, or a magnet on the refrigerator. So those programs still exist. However, there's something a little bit more accessible, and it doesn't require fire departments to go look for the information. It's called Smart 911, and it's an electronic, internet-based safety profile system. So what happens is, when someone's enrolled into this program, I'm going to talk about the specifics of that enrollment in a little bit, but when someone's enrolled in this program, they set up a safety profile that dispatchers have access to. There's only two people that have access to it. That is you, and that is the dispatcher that is, or the call taker that's receiving your 911 call. And so what's displayed in that safety profile are all the addresses you have linked to your account, medical information, medications, conditions, special conditions, whether you're on oxygen or not, home information, like there's a Knox box at this location, right? So the fire department can be notified of that ahead of time, or other means of ingress information, the best way to get inside the home, description of any pets, vehicle information. So if you have a medical emergency inside your vehicle, we can have vehicle information, and emergency contact. So fire and EMS not only can come there and just treat you, but if somebody needs to be notified, we'll have some of that information. This is all information you supply, and it is very secure. It is all encrypted information with the strictest of safety standards, and Smart 911 conducts routine audits within the system to check for security breaches. But these things are very, very safe. As I mentioned before, that Smart 911 system enhances, it doesn't replace, because we still use Vial of Life and File of Life, because people are still not quite comfortable putting their information out there on secure platforms on the internet. So we still do the file life if the individual wishes. Who pays for this? How do you get enrolled? So unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because this is accessible based on the jurisdiction, and a lot of times 911 centers, dispatch centers are run by the county, not every time, but in most cases. And so it's usually up to the jurisdiction to decide who's going to pay for this. Here where I live in Hamilton County, Ohio, our Smart 911 subscription is paid for by the county taxpayers, or it's paid through taxes. So the dispatch center, the communications center, has a subscription that they pay annually to Smart 911. And it is not necessarily cheap, but this is not something that you pay for as an individual. In order to be signed up for Smart 911, your dispatch center, your jurisdiction has to be on board with that. The first thing that happens when you go to smart911.com, they don't have a phone number. So when you go to smart911.com, one of the first things you do is you enter your zip code to determine whether or not your jurisdiction has Smart 911 capabilities. Now, my understanding, Marla Gordon on the call here did that for a lot of the counties for the individuals that are on this call. And unfortunately, Smart 911 is not available. However, what I do encourage you to do, and Smart 911 does this, is they provide materials for you to utilize to send to your local politicians to say, we need to be on board with this. And if you need any assistance with this, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll be glad to talk to anybody on the call here that needs more information about this. And I say that about anything. Any questions you have, do not ever hesitate. I know I don't live in your jurisdiction necessarily. That doesn't matter to me. I'll be glad to help anybody. So that's how someone gets enrolled into this program. If you are lucky enough to have a jurisdiction or live in a jurisdiction that supplies this access to Smart 911, then going to Smart 911 and creating a profile can be done. If you need assistance, contact your local fire department. They'll be glad to send somebody out. What we do here is somebody calls us, I send out one of my paramedics, and they'll meet with the individual and they'll help them set up a profile. It is very intuitive and pretty easy to do, but I also understand that doesn't necessarily translate to some of our older adult population. And easy to me is not the same thing as easy to them. So we provide that assistance if necessary. So that's Smart 911. It's a great way to get information to first responders very quickly, and especially if there's a fall where there's a subsequent head injury and someone's unconscious and we don't have a whole lot of information, right? Or perhaps Mrs. Smith is, older and just doesn't have a really good grasp of what her current medical conditions or medications are. And so a lot of times then there's no family members around, they can't give us the information. Smart 911 does that for us. And the last thing here are alert bracelets. And I know a lot of you are familiar with these. They come in today, especially in 2022, they come in a variety of styles: pendants, watches, or bracelets rather, that look like watches. So they look very stylistic. They don't have these big clunky things anymore. I highly encourage, if you are not subscribing to one of these services, that if finances allow, that you do this. I will say costs vary based on the companies. When you look at some of these services now, we're probably looking between $50 and $60 a month. Maybe a little bit cheaper if you don't get the enhancements. And some of those enhancements include fall detection. However, I would say that wearing one of these devices without having the fall detection, it is not advisable. So what happens when Mrs. Smith falls, they have fall detection. So these sensors sense that sudden movement of the fall and then the stillness. So if Mrs. Smith is unable, she hits her head, she's unconscious, she can't call 911. That device sits there and it will activate after a period of being still. So those are really important. And I highly encourage those, again, if accessibility exists. A lot of times now, a lot of these companies, like with my mom, it took me forever to convince her to wear one of these. And she says her complaint was, I don't want to call 911. I want to call you. And so I certainly understand that. I was my mom's 911. both fortunately and unfortunately as her primary caregiver, but we finally found an agency that would notify me first before calling 911. So so those options do exist now. So a lot of people, they're afraid. They're like, I don't want to, if I need something, I don't want to call 911 right away. Who else can it call? So it goes through that process of calling the individual first, and then 911. So, and there were a couple of times where my mom activated her device and the company called me. And it wasn't an emergency, but she needed something. She wasn't unable to get up, and she didn't feel like it was an ambulance a need, but somebody, you know, that where I could alert a neighbor or something, or go there myself. So a lot of enhancements have come down the pike over the years with the original fallen and can't get up devices. But these are some of the things you can put in place. Smart 911, Knox systems, these fall detection devices and these alert systems. These things can alert us and give us information in a more readily fashion so that we're able to assist you more quickly, therefore limiting the injury potential for a fall should it occur. Right. And so I'm going to wrap up here and allow for some time for some questions. But basically, in summary, you know, and I think Benjamin Franklin said this, you really can't trust anything that you see on the internet anymore. But an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Everything that we do now is going to help us in the long run. And so the best time to plant a tree is 25 years ago. The best place to start a fall prevention program or to get engaged in fall prevention activities was 25 years ago. When's the next best time? That's today. I hope a lot of the comments that I made and the information that I presented today was beneficial for you. I hope it made sense, and I hope I didn't bore you with too many statistics or too much information. But I was hopeful that these things that I presented here were something that you could definitely relate to, and definitely, if nothing else, seek more information about or take next steps for. So with that, I will turn it back over to Marla and we'll go from there.
Thank you so much, Will. Such wonderful information, and you and your department's commitment to fall prevention is very commendable. I wish it was protocol across the country, certainly. If you have a question for Will, feel free to click at the bottom of your screen on Q&A or chat, and you can type those in. Will, I know you mentioned the Smart 911, and I had looked into it, and it's not available in a lot of the greater Cleveland areas, unfortunately. They do have the formatted letters on their website. Where do you begin? Do you recommend sending it to a mayor, a councilman? Where do we start? You're muted, Will. Sorry.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
So, so depending on your jurisdiction type, right? So if you live in a township, you want to start with your trustees. If you live in a city jurisdiction, you want to start with your city council members, those that you're most familiar with or more familiar with, perhaps. Email or reach out to all of them, all of them. And another method, township administrators or city mayors. That's the best place to start. And you know, I will say this too. You're fired. I'm going to say this, and I always say this, and here's the thing. I'm never really afraid to name drop, right? Because we don't have time to mess around. We just don't. We don't have time. Too many people are being injured. Too many people are losing quality of life. Too many people are being taken from their homes because of a fall, and sustaining a significant injury that doesn't allow them to go back home. Too many people are dying as a result of falls. So we don't have time to mess around. Funding is getting more scarce. So I will not be afraid to say your fire department should be one of your biggest advocates. So one of those things that you can do also is to reach out to your fire department. And if you're not familiar or comfortable with reaching out to your local government officials, reaching out to your fire department and say, hey, there's this system. What can you do to help advocate for us?
Excellent. Thank you. In the meantime, until that's accessible to individuals, is there a way to give a garage code or to let a fire department know that there's an extra key somewhere?
Sure. Most fire departments will take that information. And even though Smart 911 isn't available, most dispatch centers and communication centers have what's called the ability to establish what's called a premise history. And so what they can do is they can put information in that premise history to say, oh, as the dispatcher is dispatching, they can look at it and say, oh, Mrs. Smith has a key underneath her pot by the back door. And then they type that in. It takes time, it takes effort. The nice thing about the Smart 911 is it's automatic. It's pushed information instead of information that we have to draw out. But those things are available, so you can still reach out to your local fire department, and they can still communicate with their communication center and say, hey, you know, Mrs. Smith needs information put in for a premise history. The problem is it needs to be updated
regularly. Wonderful. I don't think I see any other questions coming in because you did such a great job of covering all of that information. But I do want to remind individuals that Kendal at Home was lucky enough to receive a grant from the Ohio Department of Health to have 2 of our care coordinators, Stephanie and Melissa, get trained in stepping on. And we will be offering that program beginning in October. So if you haven't already registered, space is limited. So please go to our member portal and register for stepping on. It's a 7-week evidence-based program focused on decreasing falls. And glad to hear a lot of the information you mentioned, Will, we're already doing at Kendal at Home, including annual fall assessments, and providing pendants, emergency alert devices, and all of that. So great information that you shared. We appreciate you being with us today, and wish everybody well and stay vertical.
That's right. Thank you for everything you guys do. Kendal at Home is great.
Thank you so much.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.